you're not offering an inferior education by bringing your kids into the home space. In fact, the home offers you a platform that is far superior.
Welcome to the Honestly Adoption Podcast, a show about adoption, foster care, advocacy, and becoming the best caregiver possible. Pull up a chair. We're glad you've joined us. Here are your hosts, Mike and Kristen Berry.
Hey friends, welcome back to the Honestly Adoption Podcast. Mike Berry here, along with Kristen Berry. We're your hosts for the show, and we're glad you've chosen to spend a little time with us this week. We are in Season 24, Episode 203, and we are excited to share a playback episode that we did with our good friend Julie Bogart. Julie Bogart is the homeschool guru. She is amazing, and she joins us to talk about choosing homeschooling and making it awesome. We're excited for you guys to hear this episode because she has such great insights. Do me a favor if you haven't done so already and check out our podcast website, honestlyadoption.com/podcast. You can get caught up on past episodes, and you can even subscribe to the show through iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, wherever podcasts are available. We would love for you guys to do that, and even leave us a review. Reviews help. We would love for you guys to do that. And we're glad you guys have joined us. Listen, if you want more from the podcast, we invite you guys to consider becoming a podcast VIP member. Visit patreon.com/honestlyadoption. When you're a VIP member, you get bonus behind-the-scenes content, video versions of the episodes, and a couple other goodies. We're glad you guys are here, and now on with the show.
Julie Bogart is the popular voice of common sense and compassion in the homeschool community. She is the creator of the innovative writing program called Brave Writer and the popular fast-growing practice called Poetry Teatime. She is the founder of a homeschool coaching community called the Brave Learner Home. She home educated her 5 children for 17 years who are now globe-trotting adults. Julie draws from her work with tens of thousands of homeschool families over the past 20-plus years and her own homeschool journey to enrich the homeschool and parenting experience. Her writing program includes award-winning online writing classes and paradigm-shifting writing manuals that allow parents and kids to become allies in the writing process. Julie is also the author of the best-selling book, The Brave Learner, and host of the popular podcast, A Brave Writer's Life in Brief. She enjoys raising African violets and playing with her brand new granddaughter. Julie lives in Cincinnati, Ohio. Julie, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's exciting to be here.
Yeah, so I have to tell you that I'm learning all about you right now, Julie, because for the last year, I kid you not, Kristen has been fangirling over you. I've been hearing your name for the last year, Julie Bogart, everything that we do with homeschooling. And I'm like, is she like an empress? Is she what country is she the queen of? And Kristen's like, she's the queen of all things homeschooling. And so I just need to know for my own personal sake, like, I want to know who you are. Tell me all about you. Cause this is like, I need to start fanboying too. So I need to know about you. So tell me about you, beyond that bio.
Yes. I'm happy to. I grew up in Southern California in Los Angeles. I attended college at UCLA. I lived for a period of time in North Africa. My first child was born in Rabat, Morocco. I have 5 kids. They're all grown now. During those years that I was raising them, I began my writing career. My mother is a professional author who's written over 70 books in her career. So I grew up around writing. My grandmother, who was an unpublished poet in the great Irish Catholic tradition I come from, gave me my first lock and key diary in 4th grade, and a love of writing was born then. So by the time I was raising children, I remember when my oldest was taking naps, we lived in Morocco, I would go up on the roof and I would write these long descriptions of Morocco and interactions I had with Moroccans because I was confident or certain at the time that I would be writing the great historical fiction novel one day and I'd need all that information. So writing has sort of been the warp and woof of my existence. And while I was raising all these babies and staying home with them, it was a very compatible part-time job. I worked as a magazine editor and a ghostwriter and all those ways. And then I started homeschooling. And I had these friends who were also homeschooling who knew that I was this freelance writer, and they were struggling to teach writing to their own children. So one of them came to me and said, what curriculum are you using? And I said, well, I'm not using anything. I just reach onto my shelf and I pull down Peter Elbow or Pat Johnson or, somebody that I've been studying, and William Zinsser, Natalie Goldberg. I just pull down their books and we just do whatever I think is fun to do. So this friend was staggered by this notion and said, would you be willing to get a group together and just share with us what you know about writing? So the genesis was really that question. And the first thing that I did with her is I asked her to bring the writing program she was using with her to this meeting. So she did. And I opened it up. It was a 3-ring binder back in the day, 1990s. We didn't have the internet yet. And I looked at the opening directions for how to write a paragraph. And there was a sample paragraph on this page. So I read it and I looked at my friend and I said, Marcy, have you read this paragraph? And she said, yes. And I said, did you like it? And she said, what do you mean? I said, well, when you read it, did you think to yourself, gosh, I wish there were a second paragraph because I want to know more? And she said, no. And I took the notebook and I just gently brought the cover back down and I said, then let's not use this program to teach writing. If the sample paragraph was so dull, you didn't remember reading it and you don't want to read more, is this really the kind of writing you want your kids to do? And for me, that was a wake-up moment. I was unaware that the majority of writing programs available to homeschoolers were this lifeless, dull, tedious exercise in fulfilling requirements or learning how to write accurately. They had completely forgotten about the power of writing. And that's what led me to create the program that I've created.
I love it so much. Mike really isn't kidding. I've bounced back to your book or your podcast this whole last year to understand a little bit of where we're coming from as, I never would have identified myself as a homeschool family. We were always like, oh my gosh, I'm not doing that. My background, just as a person, is from an entire family of educators. The entire thing. All of them. My grandma, my grandpa, my parents, my aunts, uncles, everybody. So years ago, we kind of stumbled into homeschooling because we are raising children who have experienced childhood trauma. We are raising children who have medical special needs, learning disabilities, learning differences. And so for us, we were like, I don't know. School has been really discouraging. My child is feeling really depressed or really bad about herself or bad about himself. And maybe we should try something different. And it's interesting that you talk about that experience of discovering that the homeschool curriculum was lifeless. I like that word for it. We tried with some of our older kids to homeschool years ago, and I purchased a curriculum, a really expensive curriculum. And I was super confused.
The more lifeless.
I think so. There was some really uncomfortable inaccuracies in the United States portion of it. As a multiracial family, we found some really offensive language. And then the rest of it was just boring and confusing, and I was overwhelmed. And I have 8 children, so and I was running in home daycare at the time. So I thought, hey, let's homeschool too. And so, here I am juggling the babies and trying to read this curriculum with my kids who were at that preteen age where everything I say is stupid anyway. And so I'm like, hey, let's read this curriculum. It's going to be so fun. And they're like, this isn't fun and you're not fun. This is terrible. And it was terrible. And I was trying to pretend like it wasn't, but it was. And then every resource that I looked into was made for younger parents. I heard some kind of idealistic approaches to homeschool, but they were moms of 4-year-olds.
Yes.
And I'm a mom currently of my youngest is 11 and my oldest is 34. So when I look into these resources and I think, well, that's adorable, but I already did that stuff with my preschoolers. I don't need more preschool information. I need somebody who has actually done this with older kids. So, those kids grew and eventually attended a wonderful high school. They just graduated, and that was a good experience. But then we've kind of come back around to that again with our younger kids. If my kids' narrative, and I have to say, we're not anti-public school. We have some great, amazing teachers that our kids have had.
Agreed.
But when our kids are coming home and they're saying, I'm just so stupid. I'm so stupid and I'm never going to get anything done. And I everybody thinks I'm bad and I can't sit still in my chair and I don't understand why we have to take another test, or whatever was happening in that environment. Then we had to ask ourselves again, are we doing the right thing here? For Mike and I, we traveled for work back before COVID. We traveled and spoke to large groups of people. So COVID kind of ruined that for us. But we thought 1 year till our next child goes to high school. Let's just do it. Let's do homeschool. We're going to learn at home. We're going to take some time to learn those skills that the kids are struggling with. And we're going to travel all year. We were calling it our travel year. And then everything got canceled because of COVID. But that brings us around to kind of our, we've had this reactionary homeschooling where we were like, oh my gosh, we got to do something different. And then we've had this different approach, which this time around we've said, what if we learned American history, but we look for our own resources this time? What if we read articles in the newspaper? What if we look up, what really happened? What if we listen to all these different voices? And all of a sudden, we see this curiosity. We have kids who are voluntarily calling and writing to their representatives, like on their own time, because they heard about an injustice and they want to do something about it.
Right.
All that to say, our listeners over the years, or our readers over the years have said, what do I do? I'm in a crisis. I think I need to homeschool. What should I do? And to that, I would say, I don't know. I wouldn't homeschool. When I read your book, you are a mom of grown children. You are a grandma. And I thought, this is, first of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
This is a woman that I can listen to. I really needed to hear that, that there were lots of different ways to do this, and that, someone had actually gone before us in a style of learning that is a little more similar to the way we learn things in our house. So for our listeners who are now not just wondering about homeschool because of their unique circumstances, but have been thrown into homeschool because of COVID.
Yes.
What's the first thing you would say to our listeners here who are jumping into this experience with no parachute?
I love that question. And it seems like that's everybody's question this year. A year ago when I was interviewed places, people didn't know about homeschooling. So there was no urgency. It was more like, what about socialization? But now everyone's like, what's the first thing? Because literally they're going to wake up in the morning and have to do something. So I love this because it gives me the chance to talk about the difference between school and home. So when your kids go to school, they are attending a building that has a structure in place that supports the kind of learning activities that can be done with 25 to 30 kids in a room, maybe more in some schools. There is a designated leader of that space. There are desks. There might be couches. Some schools are trying to be more like homes, but you really don't have permission to just go flop on the couch. It's ordered. It's structured. You have to follow the guidelines. If you want to go to the bathroom, you need a hall pass to pee. So school has a characteristic to it that many of us experienced as children. It lives as almost a ghost on our left shoulder. I call it the ghost of public school past, which reminds us continually of the structure and expectations of school. Then we come home, and this little voice is whispering away into our left ear. You need to get up by 8 in the morning. You should be dressed and ready for school by 9, no pajamas. You're going to sit at this desk. Excuse me. You're going to sit at this desk. You're going to pay attention, and this lesson's going to take 20 minutes. And so your child is suddenly faced with turning the place they love into a place of structure. So when your kid is in the home environment, what you want to remember is that this is a place that they love being. It's a place where they get to show up as themselves. It's the place where I kick off my shoes and strip my bra, right? Like, I want to just be myself at home. I want to get up and get a snack when I'm hungry. I want to use the bathroom when nature calls. I'm not interested in obeying a set of rules around how to learn. But that doesn't mean learning can't happen at home. So what I invite your listeners to consider, what I invite all of us to think about as a thought experiment, what does learning look like when it is suited to the home environment, rather than thinking about how to bring school and superimpose that on the home? So what's an example? Well, for instance, let's say you have a child who has a writing assignment and it's time for them to commit words to the page. A school version at home would look like tucking that child into a desk, possibly in their bedroom, leaving them for 20 minutes with a piece of paper and a pen and telling them to get it done. Our typical picture of what we think homework looks like. But if all the learning is happening at home all the time, you could actually take advantage of the fact that your child is at home. You could put that assignment on a clipboard. You could tuck that child into the corner of the sectional with a cozy blanket, hand them their favorite color pen, let them pet the cat while they're writing their little piece. And suddenly you've actually released energy for the writing because you're using the properties of home to support the activity. Similarly, your child may have 20 problems they have to complete for math. Can you give them a snack? You know, maybe they dip their hands over and over into a bowl of almonds and dried apricots. Or perhaps your child wants to do that math homework out on the trampoline or on the back deck. Maybe your child needs you to just sit with them so that they're not lonely. They can do all the problems. They just don't want to be alone grinding through 20 problems by themselves. They need you to look at it with them, to laugh at a joke that occurred to them after problem 3 before they started problem 4. These are things you can do at home that are not allowed in school because school isn't set up that way. So the number one recommendation then is to be home for learning, to bring home all the way into the learning you want to do.
I love that so much. One of the things that we've realized, we're actually homeschooling our youngest 3, 11, 12, and 13, and our 11-year-old niece. And I love that idea because we have all this freedom.
Yes.
So when our child responds, let's say with frustration, and at school, that child might be in trouble for having that level of frustration, or that might be misunderstood for something else. At home, when there are 4, 5 of us sitting here working through science, and all of a sudden one child has their head down on the table or arms folded or making an angry face, we actually have the freedom to say something like, wow, it seems like you're feeling really frustrated right now. So, we might say next, it's a skill that we teach just in our connected parenting. It seems like you're feeling really frustrated right now. We can't kick the table, but we can take a minute. Do you want to walk out to the barn, or do you want to, do you want to go grab a snack? Maybe the child says back, no, I don't want a stupid snack. And then we say, hey, that's cool. You don't have to. We're going to go ahead and move on with our science lesson. You let me know when you're ready to join back in, because we have the freedom. I think initially when I first started homeschooling, I thought I had to follow the same structure.
Yes.
But we teach something totally different. With connected parenting, we teach this idea of understanding that a behavior is it's a language, it's a sign that something else is happening. What we'll normally find out is I was just confused by negative numbers, or I got really upset because I thought about that time that I went into the foster care system. We're like, oh gosh, we thought we were just talking about negative numbers. We have the freedom to do kind of two, to really build relationships with our children, and also to educate that those two things are hand in hand, that we can do both at the same time.
And actually, if you do the research and start to read sort of the thinkers in the educational space, what they're saying about learning is even more easily achieved at home. So they talk about personalized learning plans. Well, that's a teacher attempting to come up with personalization for 25 kids. But you have, well, in your case, you have 8, but most people have fewer than 8. And even 8 is far fewer than 25. Right. So when we're thinking about personalization, it's actually achievable in our families. Or we hear these educators talk about creating environments that feel emotionally safe, where they are trauma-free spaces, where when you are in a classroom, you do not have to risk exposure or being called out in a way that would make you feel awkward or uncomfortable. Well, home provides that in spades. You have loving parents, you have supportive siblings. Even when they have squabbles, there's still a sense of being a unit, of being a family. And so I want to invite you to realize that the cutting edge of education in the academy right now, in the sort of halls of learning, are actually citing what are already the benefits of being at home. So being home is fabulous. John Holt, the great education reformer, says, what is most important and valuable about the home as a base for children's growth into the world is not that it is a better school than the schools, but that it isn't a school at all. And I think that's where we want to really stand firmly as we move into this homeschooling experiment as a global community during the pandemic. You're not offering an inferior education by bringing your kids into the home space. In fact, the home offers you a platform that is far superior to the environment of a building called school, if you choose to see it that way.
I like that you end by saying, if you choose to see it that way. And I think that when I think back to my previous attempts at educating my children at home, I didn't choose to see it that way. I thought, I'm messing this up. I'm terrible at math. Why am I trying to teach my kid who's also terrible at math how to do math? They're going to be so far behind. Shifting our perspective, choosing to see it for what it is. You actually, I wasn't going to ask you this, but in your book, you talk about writing that narrative of what happened during the day, occasionally writing down everything. I bathed the baby. I changed a diaper.
Yes.
My child played the piano. Can you tell our listeners a little bit more about what you mean by that? Because for me, that really opened up a lot. We're actually done in our house right now. We're done with a lot of the academic part of it. I don't know how else to say that, but the math, sit down and let's write something. We're actually done with that by lunch every day. Yes. And the reason we're doing that is because we started to see the value to everything else. We live on a farm.
Love it.
If the kids are in the barn, we're learning to measure medication for our horses. We're learning to problem solve, to build things. And all of a sudden we don't have to repeat 7 hours. What if 24 hours? What if instead of saying you must read for 20 minutes a day, we just found books that we love. And then, somewhere around 1 a.m. we say, you've got to shut your light off. You can't read the whole thing tonight. Just that simple shift. So can you tell us a little bit about that practice of writing down that narrative of your day?
Yeah, I call that the monthly narrative sketch. What I discovered, and I'm sure it's common to all of us when we first start, we think we need to plan ahead. We need to schedule out what we're going to do. And perhaps initially there's a value to that because we're learning the rhythm. We're trying to figure out, can I do math and English and history and science all in a day? And how long do they take? And if I have 5 kids, how do I do it 5 times? And so we make a plan to sort of reassure ourselves that we're being conscientious and to try and imagine into the future what this homeschool experience could be like. But what I've noticed over and over working for 30 years with homeschoolers is that when we depend on a schedule, we often wind up at the end of the week chastising ourselves for what we didn't do rather than celebrating what we actually accomplished. And we sort of live under the shadow of guilt and nerves that somehow we're not doing enough and we're not following the school protocols. So this feeling of being behind and not doing enough just leads us to try to do more, and then we don't do that more, and it's like this vicious cycle. So of course this happened to me because I am a normal human being, and I did exactly the same things every normal human being who homeschools tries to do. And one day I realized that actually we had had a really good day and none of it was on my schedule. It got kicked off by a question a child had, and the next thing you know, we were down the rabbit trail of looking up information and reading more, and then we found a movie that went with it. And it had been, in a weird way, an ideal day of education. But I was afraid I shouldn't get credit for it because I hadn't planned it. I literally felt like, well, this doesn't count because I didn't plan it ahead. But I went ahead and I wrote it all down anyway, because I felt like I needed a record to prove to myself that the day hadn't been wasted since it wasn't in my plan. And this led to this practice where I started keeping track once a month, just one day a month, of a single 24-hour day. I still have it. It's a secret blog on Blogger. I added photos to it. I would just write down each child and exactly what happened. So if I was giving a bath to a 4-year-old and that child recited the little Three Little Pigs story, I wrote that down. If we were driving to the dentist appointment and someone wanted to know about cavities and how they were formed, I wrote that down. If somebody got in a fight with a sibling, I wrote that down. If one of my kids struggled with reading and cried, I wrote down the tears as well as the fact that we attempted the lesson. And these narrative sketches actually became a way for me to grow as a home educator. I was able to see gradual progress. I could call back 2 or 3 months and realize, oh, this problem's been going on for a while. That wasn't just a bad mood that day. Maybe we are really in a bad program for her. Or I might notice, wow, she was so stressed out in September, and here we are in April, and she hasn't been stressed out for how long? And I look back, oh my gosh, 3 months now. So the monthly narrative sketch was consistent enough that I could do it. If it had been daily, I would never have done it. Even weekly for me felt like too much. But monthly was still enough consistency that I could get a perspective, sort of a sweep of the whole year. And it just became this very reliable, reassuring practice to help me feel successful as a home educator.
Hey guys, Mike Berry here, jumping into the middle of this podcast episode. I hope you're loving this conversation as much as we are, but I wanted to jump in here and tell you that we are trying out a brand new app called the Wisdom app, and we want to invite you to join us for a conversation on it next Thursday, December 16th at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Here's what you need to do to connect with us. Download the Wisdom app, then follow us at Honestly Adoption, and you're going to get notified when we go live. We're going to be live Thursday, December 16th at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and we'll also drop a link to our Wisdom profile in the show notes. During our broadcast next week, we're going to be answering your questions on trauma, attachment, behaviors, behavior response, you name it, bring them to us. We're going to have a great conversation. We hope you guys will join us Thursday, December 16th, 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And now, back to the show.
I think it's so great that you talk a lot about what works for you. So this idea that we could do a narrative every single day. If you really enjoy that,
right,
do it. We could do it every single week, or we could pause and do that once a month and be able to see this, 12 months of ideas or growth. I love that. And it actually kind of leads me to a next question, which I was listening in on an Instagram live that you did just recently, and I wrote so many things down. I took so many notes, and I kept telling, other people, I'm like, listen to this. So there was so much to gain from that. You asked a question. Imagine you did not know how. What would you do first? Exactly. I love this question for kids. Yes. And I love this question for ourselves. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you're talking about with that script?
Yeah, and I want to give credit to my dear friend Barb. She has been my friend for over 20 years and was a part of ran the homeschool co-op I was a part of. She's a veteran homeschooler with 4 adult kids. And she said that one of the things she would often say to her children was, imagine you knew how. What would you do first? And initially, her children would say back to her, I don't know how. This is why I'm asking. And so she'd say, okay, just pause and now pretend that you were good at math. What would a person who's good at math do first when approaching this problem? And she said, invariably, once they calm down, they could make that imaginative leap. In other words, instead of zeroing in over and over on what they aren't good at and what they can't do, it put them in the mind of possibility. So they might say, well, I'd get a ruler, or, well, I need a calculator, or, well, I thought maybe I would try this approach. And then Barb said it didn't matter if the approach was right or not. She'd be like, let's find out. Let's try that. And so, yes, I think as adults, one of the mistakes we make is we're much more focused on being good at things rather than getting good at things. We're more interested in already being good at them. Children especially feel that way. I should already be good at it. When the truth of the matter is, we're not in a hurry. We only get about 80 years if we're lucky on this planet. There's no reason to already be good at something and miss out on the journey that helped us get there. So let's be more interested in getting good at it. And what would that look like? Well, experimental. When a person is an athlete, for instance, they work out a training program that is best suited to their body, and it takes trial and error. It's not the prepackaged one that you buy. It's the one the trainer determines with them in mind. Similarly, when we're talking about any kind of personal growth, the tailor making of it is what allows it to be effective. So if you are a home educator, your homeschool is going to reflect your family culture, your personality, the state of cleanliness your family needs to function at the best level. It's going to reflect your values, whether you are more oriented towards STEM or STEAM, or you're a more humanity-centered family. One thing I will say about that, my family was for sure the humanities. We are all completely useless. If there's an apocalypse, don't come to my house. I won't have anything for you. But I could recite a poem to entertain you in the dark nights. That would be it. So we felt guilty a lot about science, about math, and that's common for all families. I don't know if people realize this, but we idealize the strengths of another family. So a famous story that I love to share is I had another friend named Julie, actually, we were both Julies, and she told me that she admired the fact that my family loved Shakespeare and that my kids read all these massive books and were huge fans of poetry. She said, my kids don't like reading. And I said, yeah, I know, but aren't you the family with the daughter who crossbreeds fish and actually has new breeds of fish in your creek? And isn't your other daughter the one who created low-tech habitats in your backyard and now works for Habitats for Humanity? Like, my kids don't do any of that. They couldn't crossbreed a fish if it would save their lives. And then she started laughing. She goes, but those are easy. And that's exactly when I knew. Yeah, reading Shakespeare is easy for us, but we are not crossbreeding anything in any old creek. So
that's so perfect for our listeners to hear that just as a whole, just as a parent. I tend to give myself goals that are unreachable. So my list will start out with, 5 things I've got to complete for work, 5 things I've got to complete for school, 5 things I've got to complete around the house. And by the end of the day, instead of having 15 tasks, I've got 45 tasks.
Oh, wow.
And I've added, I've got an idea. We'll dig our own well, or some ridiculous idea that I've gotten.
Guys are amazing.
So
That's a really weird. That's really weird because we already have a well. So I'm like, man, are we going to dig another well?
I've been thinking a lot about the well.
Yeah, that's
Mike's like, oh my gosh, she is going to be in the backyard digging a well today. I can just see it. But I love that. I think that that's the thing I'm coming to appreciate a lot as we've been doing homeschool too. Certainly as foster and adoptive parents, we've come to a place where we have to realize our kids are not going to be like us. We don't have any biological kids, but I'm actually not a whole lot like my biological parents either. And so some of that realization that some things are going to be just the berries. We just like certain things. I don't know how we all ended up in the same family, but there are things that we just do and it seems easy. And people will say, you have so many animals. How do you do that? It's fun. You have so many kids. How do you do that? It's fun. It's easy. But then there are other things like long division that are really perplexing us over here. I love the idea that we're each going to have things that we are uniquely created to do.
Yes.
There are things we aren't going to go out into the world and do all the things that we learned in school. And while there's a value to exposure to all of those things, I'm glad that I took all the courses I did in high school and college. But the truth is, I'm a writer.
Yeah.
I'm really not doing a lot of those other things. We zeroed in on something that we're good at. And actually, while we're interviewing you, we keep having to put you ourselves on pause because someone else is replacing windows in our house right now. Why? Because I would not know the first thing. If I put windows in my house,
Our
they
house
would be
would collapse.
some sort of, right?
Yeah.
We would
Our
ruin
house
the
would
whole
collapse.
thing. It's a really good thing that there are people out there who know how to put windows in a house. It is a skill that neither of us have.
I love this conversation too, because for me personally, when I was growing up, I was terrible at school. And it wasn't because I wasn't smart. It's because I felt guilty. I remember feeling guilty the older I became. When I was a high school student, even a college student, I felt guilty because I'm like, I don't really want to sit here and listen to this. Like, it just wasn't my thing. And I kept feeling guilty because I'm surrounded by all of these kids that seemed like they wanted to be there. And there was this ideal that was kind of imposed on me growing up, and the area that I grew up outside of Cincinnati. I'm from Cincinnati. So you said Cincinnati earlier, and I was like, wow. Yeah. Or she said, Kristen said Cincinnati. I'm like, oh, there we go. I'm from Cincinnati also. But outside of Cincinnati. And
that's where we lived when we first got married.
Yeah, it is.
Amazing.
You said Cincinnati. I'm like, oh, we love Cincinnati. I grew up in New Richmond, which is just east of Cincinnati.
Yes.
And I remember, and New Richmond is a good school district. It really is. I went to school with a lot of, there are kids that I graduated with that are like doctors and lawyers. I mean, big, I'm putting this in quotes. No one can see it, like these high performing careers or whatnot. Right. But there was like I've always felt like there was this pressure, and I felt stupid because like I was less than, because I'm sitting here and I'm like, I don't really want to do this. I would rather be outside. And when summer break would come, I'm like, I would be up at 7:00 in the morning because I wanted to maximize my entire day romping in the woods, playing around our pond, roaming through the creek. And I got more out of that than I don't remember anything sitting in a classroom, even college. I don't remember. And my degree was in something totally different. I'm an author now. But I just, as I'm listening to this, I love this because it's freeing for me. And I know that some of our listeners, we have lots of listeners who are in a peril right now because we're in this pandemic, and they have been forced to take on a role that they never thought was possible. And they feel like they have this standard to measure up to that they're not measuring up to. And I look at that like you're making up the standard that you're trying to measure up to. It's not, it's a false narrative that you're believing, because I'm listening to this conversation. I'm like, this is so freeing. Like, even for me now, long past being in school, and I'll never sit in a classroom again.
Well, no, so
You know?
I love that you brought that up, because my oldest son, so imagine this is my oldest of 5. He has 2 parents with master's degrees. So we're big into education. His dad taught at university. So we imagine our kids are all going to go to college. That's like a high priority for us. Plus,
Yeah.
I loved college. It's like 4 of
Right.
the best years of my life. I'm a total student. So as he's coming down the pike, he's allergic to anything that resembles traditional methods. I mean, truly.
Allergic.
And,
I love that.
Yeah. And I tried to schedule him. And one day, we did it for 3 months when he was in 4th grade. And he woke up one morning and said, "Mom, I hate my life." Not I hate school. I hate my life. It was oppressing him. So we were much more unschooly with him. But even in high school, I prophesied doom over that kid so many times. I said, "Look, I know that you don't want to do these things, but you'll never get into college if, right? You'll end up flipping burgers, right?" I said the horrible things that parents should never say to their children.
Right.
A misguided sense of responsibility for his future, as though I was the architect of who he should become, rather than joining with the person he was and allowing him to be the architect.
Yeah.
And so I had to learn it through truly the school of hard knocks, and a child who was ferociously tenacious to be true to himself, which I give him such enormous credit for now, because in the face of 2 parents' pressure to continue to contend for what he knew was true about who he was a Herculean task. And we had to learn from it. He made us learn. So during high school, he quit. And I mean, he quit everything. He quit the option of going to public school or homeschool or unschool. He's like, "I'm 16. I'm done. I'm not doing what you think anymore." He got interested in Klingon and spent a lot of time learning Klingon, and then moved from that into constructed languages and became fascinated with those. Taught himself math using Khan Academy and his own brain, math levels that I could never have taught him, somehow discovered on his own. Read widely, trashy stuff, good stuff, kind of a mixture. Was a part of a Shakespeare acting company, did that for 2 years. And then at the time when he should have graduated, when I would announce to my family the great success of being a homeschooler, he said, "No, I do not want a graduation or a party." So I didn't get to have that with my first child, which felt like a robbery. But of course, is it about me? No. About him. Yeah. So we didn't. And then a year later, one of his friends was like, "I think I want to go to college." And Noah was like, "Well, I want to live with you, so I'll go to college too." Really deep decision. And it was time to send his transcript. And I'm like, "You're missing chemistry, 2 years of foreign language. You only went to algebra 2. Like, they're not going to accept you." So I didn't want to spend the $100 to apply. So I called, because I wanted to prove to him that I was right. And I called the admissions people and I said, "I have this homeschooled kid who is missing quite a few requirements. I want to know, does he need to make those up first, or, should we even bother applying?" He said, "Well, tell me, what program does he want?" And I said, "Linguistics." He said, "Okay, great. Tell me what's missing." So, well, he never took 2 lab sciences. He didn't take chemistry. He goes, "Oh, that department won't care about that." And that was the beginning of my shock and dismay. I was like, "You mean he didn't need chemistry?" And she's like, "No." I was like, "Okay, well, what about foreign language? He only took a year of ASL and he hasn't studied French or Spanish or German, but he's been working on constructed languages and Klingon for the last 4 years." And literally, this is what the admissions department of University of Cincinnati said to me on the phone: "Put Klingon on the transcript.
Yes.
The department will love it." And that's when I knew,
awesome.
Okay, these schools are businesses, and your unique child that you're homeschooling is attractive as a candidate. And I didn't know that. So he wrote this essay that was the whole story of his fascination with language, which started with Canterbury Tales, actually, and then grew into Klingon and constructed languages and Shakespeare. And then he went to college for 2 years, hated the general ed, failed English because he didn't turn in his work, right? Like all that stuff. We were English teachers, like what? And I finally said to him, Noah, what do you want out of this experience? He said, I just want to take linguistics. I'm like, all right, done. Don't get a degree.
Yeah.
Just do your major and quit. So he did. He did 2 years of linguistics and quit college. Today, he's 33 and a self-taught computer programmer and makes more money than the rest of them.
Wow.
Completely
Wow.
learned it all in his 20s. And his 20s were rocky while he was figuring that out. I'm not saying it's a seamless journey without worry. No, I'm gray-haired. You can tell I've spent years worrying. But he had to navigate those things with a supportive mother. That's what he needed. He needed a supportive mother. He did not need, the judge and jury of academics to be his guide. Yeah. And I had to learn that the hard way with my first child. As a much better mother for the remaining 4. Yeah. Do you have the same story? Like, is your first one different than the next 7? Yeah, this is the story of parenting.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I just have to say, I'm a published author, and I spent my favorite thing to do as a kid was to build imaginary worlds in a sandbox. And I had a guidance counselor in my high school tell me, well, you probably, given that you are terrible at school, you should probably just work at the gas station, which no offense to anybody who's working at a gas station.
Right.
But it was like, he looked at me and he just saw what was on paper, which was not reflective of who I was at all. Wow. Now I love to tell stories. That's what drives most of our books is storytelling, because we built these worlds, and my parents were great about not making me conform to a standard. I mean, you can ask Kristen. They're like, I'm a rule follower by nature, but yeah.
Right. How lucky to have parents who maybe don't understand us at all, which I think is true, but allowed us to be who we are, to come from, Mike's dad worked for the phone company until he retired. His mom worked for American Airlines until she retired. Their entire adult lives from 18 until retirement were with one job. And then they got this creative son. My parents are academic, master's degrees. And I went to college too. Right. I have a college degree also. But I'm like, I'm going to draw something. I'm going to paint something. I'm going to write a book. And my parents are like, okay, I guess if you want to. And so, I think finding that value, who would have thought Klingon? I love that. I'm so glad you told that story, because that's actually what I was going to ask you next. I want to end with something that you actually said on your Instagram Live. And it's a little more sobering, but it can be these funny stories too. And that is, you said, sometimes you have to destroy your own narrative for something new to be born. And you were talking about something kind of serious. We have these ideas, this perfection, this idea of what we want to provide for our children. We know, especially as foster and adoptive parents, we went into this promising to other families, I will do my best. I will do this perfectly. I will step in and take this role. We certainly have learned that perfection is not something we can attain. Can you tell us a little bit more about that thought?
Yeah, wow. I don't think anyone's ever asked me about that before, and I really appreciate you bringing it up. I'm a huge Bruce Springsteen fan, and years ago I was reading a Rolling Stone article about an album that he had just put out, and it was a completely different style of music and writing that he typically had ever done. And the Rolling Stone interviewer asked him, how did you come up with this new sound? And he said he left home on the East Coast and moved to LA. And he spent time there absorbing a completely different experience of life. And he was married and et cetera, but he left his family behind during that period to work on this new album. And he made the statement that sometimes you need to disrupt or destroy your own narrative to discover something new. Well, when I read this article, I was faced with a decision about whether to stay married or not. And it was like prophetic language. It like lifted off the page. And I had to ask myself that very sobering question. My own parents are divorced. the one thing I swore that would never happen in my family is that I would not divorce their father. And I had only ever wanted to make it to the empty nest stage where I could provide my adult kids with a united set of parents to come home to, because I never had that. So, we make these aspirational goals when we're 20, and then we live reality. And my ex-husband, who I am on excellent terms with currently, we were at a point where that was the decision that was best for my emotional safety and for my kids. And I had to face the destruction of my fantasy. And it included putting my youngest two kids in public high school because I couldn't juggle the divorce and homeschooling and all of the fallout. And it felt like such a complete about face from everything I had committed my life to doing. But what I discovered in taking sort of that courageous step at the time, and what has proven true in the lives of my adult children and even my ex-husbands, is it released each of us to pursue a sort of secret self that had been dancing in this dysfunction and had been locked away. And I've seen every single one of us blossom, every single one of us, including my ex-husband. And I also discovered something I didn't learn the first time around with my parents' divorce. My parents didn't speak to each other again for about, 25 years. In our case, I discovered it was possible to be a family, even though you're divorced. And I credit my ex with the ability to do that. We both had to have that feeling or it couldn't have happened. But we had built enough good in our family to be able to carry out a different version of it in these years. And so what I wanted to offer parents when I wrote that in my book was to give them an escape valve when their idealism is crashing and dysfunction is surging, wherever that shows up, whether it's in a one-on-one relationship with one child, whether it's around the experience of academics, whether it's your marriage, whether it's your health. It could be something external like a fire burning down your home that you don't have the control you imagine when you're 25. That as you grow, life and your emotional well-being will deal blows, and you have the power to make that pivot that is transformational for everyone. And if you take the courageous step to live into your well-being, trusting that good will be on the other side, I do believe you will find it, that there is support and opportunity for transformation that can be powerful for everyone. Doesn't mean it's pain-free, doesn't mean it doesn't cause damage. I'm just saying that you can get somewhere that is valuable.
Yeah. One of the things I believe now in my 40s, looking back over the last 2 decades and some of the hardships we've faced, they've ended up becoming something beautiful.
Yes.
Where they began as ugly and messy. And that really describes the foster adoptive journey in a lot of regards, because we have parents who are dealing with, they didn't know what childhood trauma, what it looked like when they signed up to do this. And then they are now parenting a child with a diagnosis and they don't know what to do. We have readers, listeners, followers every day that come to our team, and they're just exhausted and they're spent. And we remind them that I know this is messy, I know this is hard, but there is beauty in it. And you may not be able to see it right now, but eventually what is tragic or broken becomes new again and has new life. And so I love that you shared that, because I think that that's the hope. Our listeners, a lot of our listeners are looking for hope. And especially with this topic right now of homeschool, especially in this current climate, who knows when people are listening to this. If you're listening to this 5 years from now, maybe we aren't dealing with a pandemic and you're like, well, that's old news. That's our hope. But one of the things that we ask all of our guests to do, and I want to ask you, Julie, if you would do this, we ask them to leave our listeners with some encouragement, because again, we do have a pretty vast audience, but one common theme is discouragement, hopelessness. The struggle is real, as we like to say. So what is one piece of encouragement you can give to our listeners?
I would love to do that. In fact, it's funny that you brought up hope, because this morning I was reading a really powerful quote. I want to see if I can find it for you. Hold on one sec. So this quote is by Rebecca Solnit. She is an activist, somebody who's worked in spaces of indigenous peoples and feminism. And so she spent a lot of time dealing with hopelessness or the feeling of oppression as a suffocating experience. And I know if you work in foster care and adoption, that you are dealing with marginalized communities all the time, and children who have suffered truly in the face of those disadvantages and the way our culture sees them. And so I read this quote this morning and it almost made me cry. I was reacting to the current climate with what's going on in our country. And this is what she writes. To be hopeful means to be uncertain about the future, to be tender toward possibilities, to be dedicated to change all the way down to the bottom of your heart. And I think that would describe anyone I've ever met in foster care. There is this belief that you can have an impact on the future, that it's uncertain and you are going to help it, and that it's your tenderness, your gentleness, your care, your love that opens those possibilities. That's the idealism that I see in the foster care families I know. And they are dedicated, you are dedicated to that change all the way to the bottom of your hearts. And I believe that where we can land that is helpful is to realize that we are not heroes, we are not singular people. We are participating in systems and communities and families, and we cannot do these things alone. So when our arms are falling from exhaustion, when we feel we can't take another step, that's the time to return to the people who form that imaginative choir of encouragement. You know, make your own commonplace book of quotes of people you admire. Turn to the people in your life that are doing the hard work and the struggle that you're doing for that empathy. I go to a recovery group every week, and I've been doing it for 12 years because that's where I find my strength, in this sort of collection of witnesses to the pain that I've survived. And I think we all need that. I think that's where our hope comes from.
Thank you so much for that wisdom and for all the wisdom that you shared with our listeners today.
Yeah.
We appreciate you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Honestly Adoption Podcast, a resource courtesy of the Honestly Adoption Company. To learn more about us, visit www.honestlyadoption.com.